Imagine waking up in a world where pain was currency, where your worth was measured not by your achievements, your wealth, or your beauty, but by the weight of your suffering and how well you carried it. Imagine walking down streets where faces wore smiles not because life was sweet, but because they had mastered the bitter taste of their own anguish. In this world, your scars would shimmer like medals, your silent battles would grant you power, and your private struggles would be your crown. But here's the paradox that slices through the heart of it all. What if the very thing you spent your whole life running from was the key to everything you ever wanted? You were taught to flee from pain, to medicate it, suppress it, drown it under distractions and obligations. Taught to believe that suffering was a mistake, a detour, a malfunction in the grand machinery of life. Yet, what if suffering was not the enemy but the path? What if mastery over your own suffering was not just survival, but the ultimate art form? And more disturbingly, what if every attempt to eliminate suffering only deepened its grip, weaving it tighter into the architecture of your existence? Consider this. When you numb your sadness, you numb your joy. When you avoid fear, you shrink your courage. When you resist loneliness, you sever your own capacity for intimacy. In your war against suffering, you do not merely silence your pain, you amputate your aliveness. You become a ghost in your own life, a walking contradiction, seeking fulfillment while fleeing the very experiences that make fulfillment possible. Ask yourself, when did you first learn to call your suffering a failure? Was it the first time you fell short and felt the sting of shame? Was it when someone you loved withdrew their affection because you dared to be broken in front of them? Was it when the world told you that strong meant unshakable, that happiness was the prize for those who stayed clean, composed, victorious? Somewhere along the way, you were handed a blueprint for a life without scars, a myth stitched into every commercial, every Instagram feed, every hollow "how are you" exchanged in sterile hallways. Yet no one told you that the blueprint was a lie, that the pursuit of a painless life was the very source of your deepest agony. You have been exiled from your own suffering, taught to view it as an invader rather than a teacher, taught to anesthetize it rather than converse with it. But what if pain was never meant to be an adversary? What if it was your oldest, most faithful companion, whispering truths that no one else had the courage to tell you? What if your suffering wasn't a punishment but a portal, an invitation to a version of yourself so vast, so luminous, that only fire could forge it? Picture the moments that defined you, the real ones, not the curated highlights you show the world. Were they born from comfort or from confrontation? Were they sculpted by applause or by the deafening silence that demanded you find a voice of your own? If you are honest, brutally honest, you will see that the most sacred parts of you were shaped not in gardens but in deserts, not in laughter but in tears, not in safety but in peril. Yet here you are, perhaps still bargaining with life, still asking, how can I get the prize without paying the price? Still fantasizing about a life of effortless serenity, still fearing that the next wave of pain might finally undo you. And so you oscillate between numbness and panic, between pretending you're fine and drowning in secret. You live half a life because you fear living fully means suffering fully too. But what if that fear was the true prison? What if the real catastrophe was not that you suffer, but that you suffer without meaning, without dignity, without understanding? What if the real tragedy was not the existence of pain, but the exile of the soul that happens when pain is silenced, when it festers in the dark corners of your being, unseen, unintegrated, unmet? There is a hidden art here, an ancient discipline that few speak of, because it demands too much, promises too little, and grants rewards too profound for words. It is not about conquering pain, nor about transcending it, but about mastering the alchemy of suffering itself, transforming it from curse into calling, from wound into wisdom, from burden into birthright. The question is no longer whether you will suffer. That is certain. The real question, the one that will define the architecture of your soul, is this: will you become the master of your suffering or its slave? Everything turns on this decision. Everything you love, everything you dream of becoming, everything you hope to leave behind when your brief walk through this world is done. And as you stand now on the precipice of that terrifying, exhilarating choice, a darker, more thrilling possibility beckons from beyond the veil of your conditioned fears. To glimpse it, to step toward it, you must first understand the hidden forces that conspired to make you fear your own fire. You must journey into the underbelly of your own psychology, your culture, your inheritance as a human being, to confront the hidden architecture of your suffering before you can ever hope to wield it. And that journey begins now. It was never simply your personal weakness, your private flaw, your singular failure. The fear of suffering was planted in you long before you had the language to resist it, long before you could even name what you were losing. It is a wound inherited across generations, sharpened by a culture drunk on comfort, polished by philosophies that promised escape, but delivered only deeper entrapment. You were trained, conditioned, sculpted into a creature that mistakes ease for meaning, distraction for salvation, pleasure for fulfillment. Carl Jung warned that when suffering is not made conscious, it manifests as fate. That the darkness we refuse to face within ourselves becomes the very force that governs our lives from the shadows. You are not merely a victim of chance when pain ravages your world. You are often the architect, the unwitting conspirator, the one who lets suffering fester by denying its rightful place in the architecture of your being. To master your suffering, you must first understand how it was weaponized against you. Consider the ancient philosophies of Stoicism, where Marcus Aurelius wrote, not about avoiding pain, but about preparing the soul to endure it without the collapse of dignity. Pain was seen as a refining fire, not a misfortune, a necessary companion in the forging of character. Yet somewhere along the long arc of history, humanity turned away from this austere wisdom. Modern culture, saturated with promises of instant gratification, hollow pleasures and curated perfection, has made suffering seem like a glitch rather than a feature of existence. Aldous Huxley saw it coming, warning of a future where people would be seduced into loving their servitude, trading their wild, painful aliveness for comfortable slavery. Your mind, wired by millions of years of evolution to anticipate threats and respond to pain as a teacher, has been hijacked by a culture that tells you every discomfort is a problem to be fixed. Pain is no longer seen as a call to transformation. It is seen as a malfunction to be medicated, outsourced, denied. You are living in the age of what Zygmunt Bauman called liquid modernity, where even emotions have been commodified, where depth has been flattened into endless scrolls of curated happiness, where meaning dissolves as quickly as it is consumed. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people, but perhaps hell is more often the self you are conditioned to betray. The self that aches and bleeds and grieves, the self you are told to abandon in favor of an optimized, smiling facade. This betrayal fractures you internally, splits you into two, the mask and the exiled soul behind it. You spend your life wondering why joy feels counterfeit, why love feels unreachable, why success feels hollow, never realizing you amputated the very parts of yourself that could have felt these things fully. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that suffering was the essence of life itself, that desire was a wound that could never be healed, only transcended through the radical acceptance of pain's centrality to existence. Yet today, suffering is treated like a disease to be eradicated, a shameful secret to be hidden, a personal failure to be corrected. And so the more you flee from suffering, the more it stalks you. The more you deny it, the more it devours you from within. The more you resist it, the more power it gains over you. This is the hidden problem. Suffering has not been removed from your life. It has been buried alive inside you. It festers in unseen corners, poisoning your relationships, warping your ambitions, contorting your sense of self. It drives you to addictions disguised as hobbies, to status games disguised as careers, to shallow pleasures masquerading as love. You think you are chasing happiness, but often you are just running faster from yourself, from the raw, undigested pain that you were never taught to honor. Gabor Mate speaks of trauma not as what happens to you, but as what happens inside you when what happens to you remains unresolved. Every unattended sorrow, every buried fear, every denied rage becomes a silent architect of your suffering, a ghost that animates your days from behind the curtain of consciousness. Until you turn to face these ghosts, until you invite them into the light, you remain enslaved to them, even as you deny they exist. There is a more brutal truth, too. You were never promised a life without suffering. No philosophy worth its salt ever made such a foolish promise. Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of one's fate, not because fate is always kind, but because only by embracing suffering as an inseparable thread of life, as tapestry, can you rise above it. To deny pain is to deny life itself. And in denying life, you shrink, you wither, you disappear beneath the glittering illusions that culture sells you in exchange for your soul. Even Jiddu Krishnamurti, who devoted his life to the idea of radical freedom, pointed out that true liberation does not come from escaping suffering, but from a total, fearless observation of it. Not judging, not fixing, not fleeing, just seeing, in naked awareness, the full terrain of your inner world, in all its beauty and brutality. You have been sold a false salvation, the belief that happiness lies on the other side of suffering, as annihilation. In truth, happiness, meaning, authenticity, they all exist on the other side of suffering's integration. The task is not to defeat pain, but to transform your relationship with it, to stop seeing it as a threat, and start recognizing it as a crucible, a sacred fire that, if endured with open eyes and a willing heart, can transmute agony into wisdom. This hidden architecture, psychological, philosophical, cultural, has built a world where suffering is both inevitable and unspeakable. You are trapped not because you suffer, but because you were taught to believe that suffering was a problem without value. The cage was not built by pain itself, but by your refusal to sit with it, listen to it, let it carve its ancient messages into your bones. But if you can begin to see the architecture of the cage, you can begin to dismantle it. If you can trace the hidden roots of your fear, you can begin to unearth a power far greater than numbness, far deeper than transient happiness, a power that comes from mastering the very thing you were taught to fear. Yet seeing the prison is only the beginning. The more unsettling question remains. What are the unseen consequences of a life spent avoiding your own fire? What invisible costs have you already paid for a life designed around the avoidance of pain? The answer is far darker and far more urgent than you might think. You walk through your life bleeding from wounds you refuse to name, smiling through griefs you never mourned, applauding yourself for surviving while inside, parts of you rot unseen. You call it strength, you call it resilience. But in truth, it is a slow and merciless erosion of the soul, an invisible hemorrhage that drains your vitality, your authenticity, your capacity for wonder. The consequence of denying your suffering is not a life free of pain, it is a life ruled by pain, as most devious disguises. Anxiety becomes your native tongue, chronic dissatisfaction becomes your baseline state. Addictions mutate into socially acceptable rituals, endless scrolling, compulsive consumption, workaholism paraded as ambition. You seek anything, everything, to stave off the yawning emptiness that creeps in during moments of stillness, whispering the terrible truth you dare not hear. That you are lost, not because you are broken, but because you have been taught to navigate life by running from the very map meant to guide you home. Neurologically, the consequences are brutal. The brain, that exquisite instrument shaped by millennia of survival, begins to rewire itself around avoidance. Neural pathways that might have been forged through courage, resilience, and introspection instead harden into loops of escapism and fear. The amygdala, seat of your primal terror, becomes overactive, flooding your body with cortisol at the first sign of discomfort. The prefrontal cortex, home of your rational thought, becomes hijacked by primitive impulses. You are not thinking anymore. You are reacting, flinching from ghosts, calling it living. Cognitively, biases anchor you further into the mire. Confirmation bias ensures you only notice information that reinforces your need to avoid pain. Hedonic adaptation ensures that no pleasure, no victory, no acquisition can ever fill the void for long. Every peak is fleeting. Every summit turns hollow the moment you reach it. The brain adapts to pleasure like a drug, demanding more and more for smaller and smaller returns. Meanwhile, the untouched grief, the silenced rage, the repressed fear metastasize in the shadows, shaping your decisions, corroding your relationships, curating a life that looks fine on the outside but feels increasingly haunted within. Culturally, the consequences spread like a virus. We have built a civilization obsessed with speed, convenience, and perpetual distraction because stillness would force us to confront the unbearable truths we've buried. Every flashing screen, every dopamine-driven app, every frenetic advertisement is a promise. Look away from your pain. Look here instead. And we do. We look. We scroll. We buy. We numb. And in doing so, we surrender a little more of our sovereignty, a little more of our sacred fire, until the machinery of culture no longer needs to coerce us. We become willing slaves. You see it in your relationships too. When you have not made peace with your own suffering, you demand that others rescue you from it. You turn love into dependence. You turn intimacy into transaction. You turn conflict into annihilation. Every argument is not about the surface issue. It is a desperate cry, "Please save me from myself." But no one can. No lover, no friend, no family member can carry the burden of your unlived pain. They can only collide with it, suffer under it, or flee from it. This is the great tragedy of avoided suffering. It isolates you. Even surrounded by people, even celebrated and admired, you remain fundamentally alone because the parts of you that ache for connection have been gagged and shackled in the basement of your soul. You build castles with no foundations. You plant gardens in poisoned soil. You mistake attention for love, validation for belonging, stimulation for meaning. And worst of all, you become complicit in your own diminishment. Every time you choose comfort over confrontation, every time you medicate rather than meditate on your pain, every time you edit your authentic self to fit the sterile demands of the world, you send a silent message to your subconscious. You are not worthy, your pain is not worthy, your real self is not worthy. And the subconscious listens, it remembers, it builds your reality accordingly. It is not suffering that makes you bitter, small, cowardly. It is unresolved, unexamined suffering. It is the silent agreement to remain asleep in the anesthetized dream of modern life. Kierkegaard warned that the greatest despair is not to suffer, but to suffer without knowing why. To drift through existence half alive, numbing, performing, enduring, while the core of your being withers unseen. If left unchecked, the final consequence is spiritual death. Not the death of the body, not even the death of hope, but the slow extinguishing of your unique fire, the particular alchemy of soul and story and struggle that only you could have brought into the world. When suffering is not faced, you do not merely suffer, you vanish. You leave behind a shell, a hollow echo of the life you might have lived had you dared to meet yourself fully in the crucible of pain. Look around you. Look within. How much of the world's madness, its wars, its addictions, its cruelty, its frantic emptiness, can be traced back to people who fled from their own suffering and projected it outward? How much violence is merely pain denied, seeking expression? How much oppression is merely fear disguised as power? You are not separate from this. Your private choices echo into the collective. Your personal rebellion or surrender shapes the unseen tides of the world. Every act of facing your suffering with courage ripples outward into the fabric of reality. Every act of fleeing from it weaves the tapestry of unconsciousness a little tighter. This is the hidden cost of a life spent avoiding your own fire. You not only lose yourself, you contribute to a world where everyone else loses themselves too. But there is another way. There is always another way. A path not of avoidance, not of anesthesia, but of alchemy. A rebellion so profound it defies everything you have been taught. A rebellion that begins with a simple, shattering truth. You do not have to be a slave to your suffering. You can become its master. The question is, are you willing to endure the fire that forges such mastery? Because the time for running is over. Now the real work begins. Rebellion does not begin with raised fists or burning barricades. It begins in the unseen corridors of your own mind, the silent, feral places where your deepest fears live like sleeping giants. True rebellion is not against the world outside. It is against the conditioned self within, the part of you trained to submit, to numb, to conform. To master your suffering, you must first unlearn the sacred lies you were taught. That happiness is the absence of pain. That discomfort is a signal to retreat. That vulnerability is weakness. These beliefs have calcified inside you like a second skeleton, a brittle armor that cracks at the slightest pressure. It must be broken. Carefully, ruthlessly, you must dismantle the structures that have kept you both safe and imprisoned. The first act of rebellion is to stop running, stop masking, stop dodging, stop medicating every flicker of discomfort as if it were a cancer. Pain is not your enemy. It is your oldest, most faithful messenger. It does not arrive to punish you. It arrives to awaken you. The moment you feel the familiar tremor of anxiety, the sharp sting of rejection, the deep ache of loss, you must resist the ancient instinct to flee. Instead, you must turn inward and say, "Speak, I am listening." It will not be easy. Every cell in your body will scream for escape. Your mind will flood you with distractions, rationalizations, desperate bids for relief. You must endure. You must sit with the fire long enough to hear what it has to say. In doing so, you begin to build a new kind of muscle. Psychic resilience, the strength not of avoidance, but of presence. This is where everything changes. Because when you stop treating suffering as an invader and start welcoming it as a teacher, it transforms. Pain, when truly faced, does not grow larger. It grows clearer. It shows you the fractures in your life you have ignored. It reveals the truths you have buried beneath performance and pretense. It strips away the lies you told yourself to survive, but which now only suffocate you. The second act of rebellion is to confront your illusions. Every narrative you inherited about who you are, what you must fear, what you must chase, must be dragged into the light and interrogated without mercy. Nietzsche called this process the revaluation of all values, a ruthless examination of everything you once took for granted. You were not born afraid of failure or abandonment or insignificance. These fears were stitched into your skin by hands you did not choose. Now, it is your task to rip them out, root by root. Ask yourself, with brutal honesty, whose dreams am I chasing? Whose fears am I obeying? Whose approval have I made the condition for my self-worth? Every time you answer, a layer of falsehood peels away. Every time you face a hidden fear and do not bow before it, you reclaim a piece of your sovereignty. The third act of rebellion is radical responsibility. You must stop waiting for someone else to save you. No lover, no guru, no philosophy, no institution will hand you freedom wrapped in a bow. Freedom is forged in the furnace of your own courage. It is born when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" Sartre declared that man is condemned to be free, meaning that no matter how much we might wish otherwise, we are responsible for giving our own lives meaning. It is terrifying. It is liberating. It is the price of awakening. No more hiding behind excuses. No more blaming your past. No more outsourcing your power. The world owes you nothing. Life owes you nothing. And yet everything is still possible. But even this is not enough. Because the final act of rebellion, the most dangerous, the most sacred, is love. Not the soft, sentimental love sold to you in movies. a fierce, uncompromising love for your own broken, beautiful humanity. A love that embraces your scars as proof that you have lived. A love that refuses to amputate the parts of yourself deemed unpalatable by a shallow, terrified culture. This love is not a feeling, it is a discipline. A daily decision to meet yourself where you are, not where you wish you were. It means forgiving the part of you that falters. It means staying loyal to your own soul, even when you stumble into old patterns, old fears, old prisons. It means seeing your suffering not as a defect to eradicate, but as the soil from which your greatest gifts will grow. Marcus Aurelius, in the dark solitude of his meditations, wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The stone you trip over is not an obstacle to your path, it is the path. Your suffering is not a detour, it is the crucible in which you forge your deepest strength, your truest self." Historical examples gleam like hidden stars. Viktor Frankl, who survived the hell of concentration camps, found meaning not despite his suffering, but through it. Frida Kahlo, whose body was shattered by an accident, painted her agony into immortality. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, emerged with a spirit tempered into unbreakable steel. These were not superhumans. They were ordinary souls who chose, again and again, to meet their suffering with open eyes and open hearts. And now it is your turn. You will not be spared the fire, no one is. But you can choose to enter it willingly, to step into your pain not as a victim, but as a warrior, not as a prisoner, but as an artist shaping your destiny with fire-scorched hands. You can choose to suffer consciously, creatively, courageously. You can choose to become a master of your suffering, rather than its servant. And when you do, when you walk through the crucible with your eyes unflinching and your heart unarmored, you will find something waiting for you on the other side. Not perfection, not eternal bliss, but something infinitely rarer. Freedom. The kind of freedom that cannot be bought, taught, or given. The kind of freedom that must be bled for, wept for, lived for. And this freedom will not make you invulnerable. It will make you invincible. Prepare yourself, because the final truth, the ultimate revelation, is closer than you think. And once you see it, you can never go back. There comes a moment, often in the ruins of everything you once thought you needed, when a blinding, terrible clarity descends. It is not gentle. It does not arrive with trumpets or choirs. It comes like a blade through silk, a quiet severance that leaves you staring at a truth so vast, so simple, it steals the breath from your lungs. The final realization is this: suffering was never your enemy. It was your inheritance. It was the secret doorway into your own becoming. You were never meant to eliminate it. You were meant to learn how to dance with it, how to transmute it into something so raw, so luminous, that even the darkest parts of you become holy. You realize now that the very thing you spent your life fleeing, the ache, the fear, the brokenness, is the thing that held the map to your liberation all along. Like a coded message written in the language of agony, every wound you suffered whispered, "Come closer, look deeper. There is something here you must claim." You were not sent here to be comfortable. You were not sent here to glide effortlessly through a world wrapped in velvet. You were sent here to feel everything, to be shattered and stitched back together, to be lost and found 1,000 times over, to stand in the full blaze of existence with your heart exposed, daring to love it all. There is no life without suffering, because there is no growth without pain, no transformation without fire. The lotus blooms only in the mud, the diamond forms only under pressure, the soul awakens only through its own unmaking. And so, the great cosmic joke unfolds. What you thought was your punishment was actually your path. What you thought was the proof of your unworthiness was the forge of your greatness. The cracks you tried so desperately to hide are the very places where your light pours out the strongest. Albert Camus once wrote, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." He was not speaking of shallow optimism. He was speaking of something deeper, something forged in frost and darkness and despair, the kind of hope that is not a denial of suffering, but a defiant embrace of it. You see it now. Suffering is not the opposite of joy. It is the soil in which joy grows. True joy is not the absence of sorrow. It is the alchemy of it. It is the knowing that even in the bleakest moments, even when everything external collapses, something eternal within you endures, unbroken, unbreakable. You are not here to avoid the storm. You are here to become the storm. You are here to let the winds tear away everything false, to let the rain cleanse everything stagnant, to let the lightning ignite everything asleep within you. You are not a victim of life. You are life, burning itself into consciousness through the furnace of your own experience. This is the final rebellion. Not the rebellion against suffering, but the rebellion against the illusion that you are powerless in the face of it. The rebellion that says, I will not close my heart. I will not numb my spirit. I will not abandon myself, even when the night is longest and the way forward disappears into blackness. Because you know now that the way forward is not always lit by certainty or comfort. Sometimes it is lit only by the fierce, trembling courage to take one more step into the unknown. And that is enough. You are enough. Not because you have conquered suffering, but because you have made it your ally. Because you have learned to sit with your pain until it reveals its gifts, to walk with your fear until it shows you the edges of your own becoming, to befriend your grief, until it sings you the songs of all you are capable of losing and still surviving. You have become the kind of soul the world quietly worships but rarely understands, the soul that can suffer without bitterness, that can hope without denial, that can love without conditions. The soul that has been to hell and back and returned with a fire that no storm can ever extinguish. This is your inheritance. This is your power. This is the truth the world tried to make you forget. Tried to drown in noise and distraction and fear. You remember it now. And because you remember, you are dangerous in the most beautiful way possible. Dangerous to the forces that profit from your numbness. Dangerous to the systems that thrive on your disempowerment. Dangerous to the inner tyrant who once told you that you were too broken to rise. You are not broken. You are breaking open. You are not failing. You are becoming. And so, in the sacred stillness of your own reckoning, you rise. Not perfectly, not without trembling, but with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you no longer need to be saved. You have already saved yourself, and no one, no fear, no sorrow, no loss, can ever take that away. Now go, carrier of the fire. Go, with your scars and your strength, your brokenness and your beauty. Go, and live a life so radiant, so fiercely honest, that even your suffering stands in awe of you. Because the art of mastering your suffering was never about escaping pain. It was about becoming so luminously alive that even pain bows before you. And now you know the way.